I can't tell you how much I enjoyed saying touch 'em all.
Way back and gone! Touch 'em all, Joe Mauer!
And now these guys are making it relevant to this year's Twins.
It's a beautiful day for a ball game.
Now, our two resident hardball nerds will attempt to touch 'em all on the week's news surrounding the Twins in MLB.
Play ball!
I didn't know they still had a team.
That's baseball. Here's Phil Mackey and Derek Wetmore.
So I saw, how many player previews have you now rolled out on the website? Are you up to like 10 player previews?
It's probably around there.
On 1500ESPN.com?
It's pretty close, yeah.
Because I saw you wrote a Brian Dozier player preview.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is last week. And it got me thinking, there's all these things we can look at with the Twins, and do they have a number one starter? Are they going to have bullpen issues? What about the Royals? How do you compare them to the Royals? There's one main reason why I think the Twins are in great shape, not only next year, but compared to the rest of the league, maybe even for the next 3 to 5 years. Most teams have a really hard time finding shortstop, second base, center field, catcher, the up the middle, kind of the cliche up the middle positions. You can find right fielders, you can find left fielders, first basemen. To a slightly lesser extent, you can find third basemen, but it's really hard to find second basemen who are among the league leaders in OPS, or center fielders who are cornerstone players for your franchise, not just plug-and-play guys. Mm-hmm. Well, the Twins, if Byron Buxton clicks, which is a big if, but I think he's going to click whether it's this year or second half of the year or next year, Byron Buxton might be one of the best center fielders in baseball at some point. Eduardo Escobar, a very steady, good-hitting shortstop. Brian Dozier, one of the best second basemen in all of baseball. And if you want to go back to catcher, if John Ryan Murphy pans out even as a league average catcher, the Twins might be league average at worst, with maybe upside to be best in baseball at the top of that spectrum at 3 or 4 of the most important positions on the entire diamond.
Yeah.
And these guys are, like, Dozier's the oldest of the bunch, and he's in his prime right now. Mm-hmm. So I reading your, and you can expand on your Dozier thoughts too, but he kind of leads that charge of premium positions the Twins are looking pretty good at right now the next couple of years.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And the 4-year contract extension last year, I think even considering some of his faults, and we can get into that in a second too if you want to, it was a big focus of the piece actually. Even considering his faults, I think that's looking like a good investment for the Twins. The argument at the time was, well, you have him under control for team control for 4 years anyways. Why bother putting pen to paper right now when you could just go through the arbitration process each year? Well, then you look at a guy who hit 28 home runs last year despite falling off the face of the earth in the second half of the season, and you're suddenly talking about a player who's going to command more than $4 million. Like, I get it that, he's part of that is because he is early in his service time and that those years are going to be more inexpensive anyways, but 4 years and $20 million is looking like a pretty good deal for Dozier, provided he doesn't fall off entirely as a player. And I guess to your point, that'd be another reason I think it's possible the Twins have a pretty good deal on their hands, because imagine if Dozier has a year where he puts together the first half that he did a year ago, and then you don't fall off. Like he was a really bad hitter for the second half of the season last year.
Well, what do you think is more likely, that he puts together a full season for the first time in his career, like he's put together first halves the last couple of years, or that he has a significant drop-off? I actually think it's more likely he figures out how to be better in the second half or how to adjust to the pitcher's adjustments. I think he's got the upside to be one of the 15 best hitters in all of baseball, which, if you just take his first half last year, which, I mean, guys have hot first halves and second halves.
Sure.
He was legitimately one of the 15 best players when you include his defense in the entire game.
Yeah. Like, I don't know that I see top 15 hitter for a full year. We haven't seen him do that yet in his career. But I do think that for second base specifically, and this is what I wrote the piece about. I mean, I think I titled it something like the most powerful second baseman in baseball. And some people might be like, well, yeah, obviously. Or others still might say, really? Yeah, Brian Dozier is head and shoulders the most powerful second baseman in baseball.
It's not even close.
There's not a close race.
Because Robinson Cano, if he was still in New York, would be in that mix. And Dustin Pedroia before injuries and stuff.
Sure.
But then again, like, Dustin Pedroia has been leveraging doubles off the Green Monster.
Yep.
And Robinson Cano is now back into more of a pitcher-friendly ballpark after hitting in a bandbox. Which I know you also have. Were you tweeting about park factors earlier today?
Yeah,
The target
yeah.
field is now
Yep.
sort of skewing toward a hitter's ballpark, which renders my point a little bit weaker. But it's certainly not Yankee Stadium or Fenway Park.
It's like pretty close to league average actually in all categories. Yeah, that Dozier's doing it in target field, I think, that's a part of it. But like, park factors is not enough to account for the difference between Brian Dozier and Jose Altuve, or between Brian Dozier and Ian Kinsler, or Brian Dozier and Robinson. It doesn't matter what second baseman you name on this list in terms of home runs, extra base hits, doubles, extra base hit percentage, all these kinds of things I went and looked at. Dozier's leading the league among second basemen, and I think that sometimes gets overlooked. Twins fans maybe sometimes start to take for granted that, well, yeah, that's Dozier. He's a powerful guy. He'll pull some fastballs out of the park sometimes, and he strikes out a lot. Like, yeah, but he's also a second baseman, and you don't see second basemen do what Brian Dozier's done the last 3 years.
Yeah. I know you spent, because you covered the beat, you were down there all the time in the clubhouse. I covered that beat when he first came up, and he's pretty much the same person, but he's a much different hitter than he was when because in the minor leagues, he was much more of a batting average hitter, hit some doubles. I don't think he hit many home runs at all in the minors.
No.
He hit maybe 8 or 15 here and there. But since working with Tom Bernansky, he has, and you could make this case about a lot of hitters, that they've kind of become Tom Bernansky.
I remember you saying that last year.
Tom Bernansky, I don't know if it's on purpose, and it's not bad. It's not bad that you've got guys who slug 400 or 450 or almost 500, who strike out quite a bit. Bernansky doesn't care as much about strikeouts in situations where if there's a guy on second base and there's 2 outs, well,
You got to
try and square a ball up.
Yeah.
Go do what you got to do.
Yeah.
If there's nobody on base, even in some cases, he doesn't care if you strike out. If he just wants you to try and get on second base, I would say get on base at all costs if there's nobody out. But Dozier, Plouffe, to some extent, Eduardo Escobar.
Sure. It was Torrey Hunter last year.
Torrey Hunter, low batting average, fairly low on base, high slugging percentage, going to give you doubles and home runs.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Dozier at some point is going to have to be a little more self-aware of, hey, you don't need to try and knock the crap out of every 2-0 pitch or every 3-1 pitch to the. Maybe you should. If there's a pitcher that's not giving you what you want, maybe you can hit a ball to opposite field once in a while. Which, I feel like he told you guys last year. I'm gonna go with the same approach I've gone with the last few years.
Well, that's what I went in spring training last year. I specifically remember we were in Fort Myers, and Dozier had one of the corner lockers in the Hammond Stadium facility there, the clubhouse, home clubhouse. And I asked, great season last year, and he's a sharp guy. He knows I wasn't going in criticizing him or going in saying, like, why weren't you better? Maybe that was the air my questions took or that my tone took. In his mind, he's coming off of a pretty good season. 2013 was good to him. 2014 was good to him. And then I'm asking him in 2015 spring training about his approach, about the fact that he's so pull happy that 72 of his 75 career home runs have gone to left field.
Yeah.
Or something ridiculous like that. I think those numbers are right. That he hit his first opposite field home run in 2015. He had 0 opposite field home runs going into the year. And
I believe it was an accident, too.
it's hard to know for sure, but
I think he said that he was trying to pull the pitch, and it was actually Bruno told us that. We had Bruno
did he?
on a radio show. And he said something like, yeah, I think Dozier was just a little behind on that pitch, or he thought it was, maybe he was sitting on a curveball or something, and it got into him a little.
I half wonder if he was joking a little bit, because that's like kind of the running thing is that, okay, Dozier's great at pulling fastballs. When he gets the pitch that he likes on the inner half, he can rip it out to left field.
Yeah.
But when he doesn't get that pitch, things start to evaporate for him and erode, and I just kind of asked him that. I said, despite a great year, A, there was the second half slump. Keep in mind, this is 2014 we're talking about. A, there was a second half slump, and B, kind of the only pitches you hit out are fastballs, and pretty much only on the inner half. Like, do you worry that starts to get out and get exposed? And yeah, he was really, I would use the word defiant. Maybe that's a little bit strong, but he did say, he's like, no, my approach, obviously it's working. Like, things are going well for me. And then, to his credit, look at the first half he had last year. Walks off 2 games going into the All-Star break, and he closes the break with like 19 home runs, which is absurd. And he hit 9 the rest of the way, I think. But like batting average, on base percentage, slugging, it all went in the tank. And kind of like what I was asking about, sort of played out again. 2015 was a repeat of 2014, a little bit for Dozier. I don't know that he's going to change, but I think at a certain point, you try to strengthen your strengths and keep going with what's working for Dozier, which for him is pulling fastballs and hitting a lot of home runs. But you also would like to shore up the areas of weakness and stuff. And that's what I'm curious to see if 2016 holds for the second baseman.
It's so weird because his season, just from 30,000 feet, just look at the end product of his season, was a huge positive for the Twins.
Yeah,
I mean, he was a positive. What was he, like a 4-win above replacement player or something? 3.5 or 4?
I want to say 3.5, which he was on. Like, and that's why.
But he was that in the first half.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's what I was going to bring up.
So the weird thing is he submarined them in the second half.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have been the best team in baseball record-wise after the first 2 months if not for him going crazy. And remember him before the All-Star break?
Yeah, he hit
he
two
hit the
walk-off
home run
runs.
off. Yeah, in 1 week, and he hit the home run against Detroit. So you get production, you get the clubhouse lift, you get all these things. But then in the second half of the season, he was a boat anchor for them. He was one of the worst everyday hitters in baseball in a lot of different ways. I mean, he wasn't getting on base. The power kind of went away.
You wonder if you knew that was coming, would the Twins have been in playoff contention by putting, say, like Jorge Polanco at second base?
Of course, it's such a weird hypothetical.
You can't do that, I know.
But yes, the answer is,
right.
Hey, he gave you this really good first half. You know that he's going to hit this in the second half. Well, absolutely, you would
Game
replace
theory
him with
doesn't quite work like that, though.
Right.
I get it.
You could expand this this theory of, okay, look at the Twins up the middle at these key positions and compare that with the rest of the league, and you could expand it for the roster and say, okay, does this guy at this position, would you be comfortable with that guy on a playoff team that you're looking to win the World Series? And then look at the Twins 3 or 4 years ago and say, all right, if this team's goal is to win the World Series, could you envision Luke Hughes playing second base?
Right,
could you envision Tsuyoshi Nishioka playing up the middle somewhere and Danny Valencia as your third baseman? And the answer is no.
Right.
Oh, okay, Ryan Domit is your DH and your backup catcher. Well, probably not on a World Series winning
Not
team.
feeling real good about
Not
that
like
one
with
either.
Mike Napoli over here hitting 30 bombs and whatever, David
Yeah.
Ortiz. But with this team, you can kind of play that game. Trevor Plouffe. I could envision Trevor Plouffe as a World Series winning third baseman.
Sure.
Brian Dozier at second base. I could envision that. I could envision Eduardo Escobar as a starting shortstop on a team that gets to the World Series or whatever. Joe Mauer has dropped off, still gets on base enough. I can envision him in a lineup batting second in October. Make all the jokes you want to, but I can envision that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on his role. But yeah, if you're just inventing a team in your head, him being the first baseman wouldn't preclude that team from making the World Series.
I could easily envision last year's Eddie Rosario batting seventh or something on a team that's playing deep into October.
Sure.
I can envision Miguel Sano in a lineup in October, obviously.
Playing
but
right
that's the
field
thing.
for a World Series contender.
And then we'll see about center field with Byron Buxton this season. But you can see it all on paper. It all looks legit, except for maybe a couple things here and there. The lineup, anyways.
There's a lot of question marks too, though. Like for all the optimism, do we know that John Ryan Murphy's going to be a league average catcher? I wrote about him in my preview series, and I think so. I think
Kurt Suzuki wasn't really a league average catcher though last year.
Kurt Suzuki was one of the worst catchers in baseball last year, and I like Suzuki. He just killed the Twins in 2015. They needed an upgrade there. I think they were smart to go pursue one. I wouldn't be surprised. We got to see how it plays out in spring training, but I think John Ryan Murphy's an instant upgrade over Kurt Suzuki and probably should be the starter from day one. Yeah. Kurt Suzuki as a backup catcher, that's totally fine at age 32, 33. But, like, there's a lot of questions. Can Miguel Sano play right field? Is Byron Buxton ready to go? Will Eddie Rosario transition? I think there's some question marks about his offensive game. I like him in the field. I've got some questions about his bat. I like Plouffe. I like Escobar. I like Dozier. Mauer, you'd like to see him take a step forward. And then, obviously, we don't even need to start listing off the questions on the pitching staff because there's so many of them. Not like, oh, they've got so many holes, but there's just so many unanswered questions. Like, who's your opening day starter right now? You don't have one. Who's your ace? You don't have one. Who are the 5 starters that are going to comprise your rotation come opening day? You don't know that. So there are a lot of things, and that's going to make this spring training pretty interesting. I don't think there's a ton of jobs up for grabs, but there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we're probably going to see them answered in the next 5-6 weeks.
Yeah, we're close, man. Pitchers and catchers start to report. The Twins have one of the latest, I think the latest report date for pitchers and catchers. It's the 21st or 2nd?
21st, yep.
Some teams are even reporting in Arizona on the 16th,
Really?
and maybe even in Florida. So I believe the Twins have the shortest camp and the shortest span between full squad workouts and the first game, which is funny because a couple of years ago when Gardenhire was still managing, they made a big deal out of, we got to get down there, we're going to go an extra 3 days of fundamentals. We're going to report 3 days earlier.
How that
We're going to
worked.
go through ground ball drills, and they lose 90 games again,
It's
regardless.
funny to me all the time, and people panic and stuff on Twitter. I don't know the exact reason. I've heard theories for why the Twins are one of the latest to report, but for all I know, it's just that's what they do. Who knows? But I do think it's funny how much panic there is. Like, what correlation is there to pitchers' fielding practice and World Series championships? Like, could we go back and commission a study over the past 25 years and take the 25 most recent World Series winners and chart the number of ground balls they hit to their pitcher to run over and cover first base? Right. Like, if we could figure out that kind of correlation, then I think we could rightly blame the Twins for not reporting earlier. But as it is, I just don't know how we get worked up about something like that. As something as trivial as a couple of days in February.
And think about, like, if you're going to compare training camp in football to, say, spring training in baseball. Mm-hmm. And in baseball, we're going to focus super hard the next 3 days on pitcher fielding practice, okay? Ground ball, turn, flip underhand to first baseman. Or,
and if the ball gets past you, make sure you cover the bag.
Right.
Don't forget to cover the bag.
Whereas in the NFL, they're installing these elaborate new play schemes, and offensive coordinator brings a new playbook in, new quarterback with different skill sets, timing routes, all these things that matter so that someone doesn't get obliviated, you know.
Now that there is this added emphasis on sort of year-round, and not 12-month a year, but maybe like 11-month a year fitness and nutrition for professional athletes, the X's and O's, I'll call them, the X's and O's of spring training just aren't quite as important, frankly. Sometimes, I bet you it used to be, guy gets off of working his off-season job, heads down south, has 4 weeks to get his cardiovascular endurance back up because he hadn't been running all off-season. Well, now you're seeing even the guys who aren't really athletic, that's not really their game, they're still coming in camp in pretty good shape, and they're ready to play baseball if they need to. So it's always funny to me that there is such an emphasis. It's good. I mean, they should work on, like, pickoffs and the daylight play and stuff like that, but let's not kid ourselves that that's going to be the difference of a win or two over 162 games.
You know how pissed off the guys like Mark Grace probably were? Mark Grace used to smoke a pack and a half a day for the Cubs. No batting gloves, ripping heaters in the clubhouse. Even with the Diamondbacks in 01, I think Mark Grace was their starting first baseman. Guys like that had to be so mad when the Mike Trout type, I'm going to be jacked up, and I'm going to do it the clean way, we think, anyways.
Right.
And I'm going to work out 24/7 and 365 days a year. It's like as soon as one guy starts doing that, and he starts hitting 320,
right.
Son of a gun.
Now I gotta go.
Put the heater out, or just retire.
Well, it's like the guy. It's like the guy at work, right? The new guy who comes in, and 2 weeks in, he's just like blowing way past his projections. He's filing all his TPS reports way ahead of schedule, and one of the coworkers has to go tap him and say, "Hey, James, hi, Derek, we work across the hall. We've talked once or twice. You've probably seen the face. I just wanted to talk to you about the TPS report. See." And he's giving me a confused look. He's thinking, well, what? I've been filing. I'm like 2 weeks early on all these. What could I possibly be doing wrong? No. It's good. It's great. No, yeah, they're all good. But you're kind of making the rest of us look bad. See, we've sort of got used to just filing them a couple weeks after they're expected, and nobody says anything. But now you're here.
I got in trouble for that one time. High school yearbook.
Overachiever?
Were you ever a high school yearbook guy?
No, I didn't do yearbook.
So they give you 2 or 3 weeks to write a 500-word story.
Sure.
Which is kind of funny. If you've gone into journalism later in life and you cover beats or whatever, and
I'm writing a 500-word story as we're recording this podcast.
It's just kind of the nature of the business, right? Yeah. And I remember, and I'm still friends with my teacher, Ryan McCallum.
Okay.
We still communicate, Twitter, email, and stuff, and he's one of the best guys of all time. And I learned more from him than almost anyone in high school. But he'd get on me because I was the overachiever who would file a story with a week to go before the deadline. And so I'd be sitting in the hallway doing something, like playing a game on a computer or something.
Sure.
And I remember a couple times he'd pull me in and say, like, don't you have anything else to be doing? I'm like, I don't know. I just filed my story. I don't know why we got on this subject, but
No, it's funny.
Mackey, overachiever.
Yeah, exactly. Now I get to make fun of you for that. That's good to know.
Did you cover Delmon Young when you covered the Orioles?
Or
Or was he with
no.
another team? He was with the Tigers, maybe.
Yes, I think that was his final year in Detroit, because I want to say the year after I left Baltimore to come here, he was like a part-time player and really successful for the Orioles. And I think that was, I want to say that was 2014.
Successful maybe in the clutch, but
Successful in like the part-time limited role. He's
Yep.
like successful in the way Danny Valencia was successful.
yeah,
And
after he left the Twins.
Buck Showalter's very good at doing that, going in and saying like, okay, yeah, this guy can't play,
Yeah.
but he can mash lefties.
Okay.
And we're going to have to face some late game lefties or whatever, just as an example.
Hey folks, going to pause for just a second here because Wetmore and I have to shamelessly plug and beg you for a few things.
That's right. We're assuming you're already subscribed on iTunes to our wonderful podcast. If you're not, take care of that. Go to iTunes, subscribe to the Touch 'Em All podcast, and if you have time, give us a rating on there. We prefer 5 stars, but beggars can't be choosers, as my mom always said.
We also have a bunch of other podcasts on the 1500 ESPN Podcast Network. The Purple Podcast for Vikings fans out there, Star Power with the superstar Mike Morris, Sports Over Beers, The Scoop with Doogie, which is a new podcast. So spread some love and check out the other content on the 1500 ESPN Podcast Network.
Well,
Delmon Young.
so I'm not going to pretend to know Delmon that well. I covered him for a few years and was around him enough covering the beat to know that very temperamental guy.
Okay.
One of the most odd guys I've ever, as far as like social lack of awareness and temperamental nature.
Will you tell the story, the primary Delmon Young story that I've heard from the Twins clubhouse?
I'll get to that one.
Okay.
I was going to read. I'm sure listeners have already. Have you seen this story?
Yeah.
The Delmon Young story.
It's disgusting.
Well, it was one of those where if you would have read me the story in the headline, but left the player name blank and said, all right, free agent player blank was arrested Sunday night and charged with battery after allegedly choking and threatening a valet in Miami, I would have thought, okay, well, I got an idea of who that might be. According to the police report, blank approached the Viceroy Hotel, where he's a resident, and asked the valet to open an elevator. The valet said the elevator was closed because the club to which it went, okay, guy who likes clubbing, guy who's hanging out in Miami, guy who might not, a guy who probably has a couple drinks in him and who might be disrespectful to workers. According to the report, blank said, "Stupid Cuban, open the bleeping door. I'm here. Now what?" Delmon Young. Third paragraph, I would have been 100% sure on Delmon Young.
Yeah.
The best part of the story is, well, so he comes back. I'm going to bleep and kill you, you Latin piece of blank. The valet frees himself. So police responding to the scene went to Delmon Young's apartment. According to the report, the officer was greeted by Young, who was naked from the waist down, and was advised to put on some clothes and provide identification. Now, again, alcohol, just going to take a guess here, was probably in play for this one.
Maybe.
But don't you at least look through the keyhole or look through the, the knot hole?
Yeah.
And see that there's police officers and put on a robe or something? Like, put on anything. Just a pair of gym shorts.
In his defense, if you are going to claim that you don't have your identification on you, "they're in my pants" would be a pretty good explanation for it.
And I don't know where my pants are, officer, but if you
really
just give
sorry.
me a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
The story, man, it was a rain out or something, and Delmon had sat out for 4 or 5 days, and they were trying to figure out, we're going to put him on the disabled list. And this is, I think, a day after I had a good 10-minute conversation with him about something, just something baseball related, and that was him. You could have a great conversation with him one day, and he's awesome, and he's slapping you on the back, and hey, what's going on? And then the next day, he's mad about something.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Were you, after that 10-minute conversation, were you thinking like, hey, we maybe turned a corner here?
We had turned a corner. It's great. Yeah.
Well, this guy, he kind of like, he might open up. I know he gets kind of a bad rap,
Yes.
and media members maybe don't like him necessarily, but hey, I've now got this little bit of
We're tight
professional
now.
rapport with him.
Oh, yeah, we're going to go, maybe not cheers a beer because I don't want him to get in trouble, but yeah, we're tight now. So I come back the next day, and Gardenhire tells us, it's me and a couple other beat reporters, Delmon, the rib cage felt pretty good. We think he's going to get back out there, and the game had been rained out, so Gardenhire just kind of leaves and says, you can go talk to him if you want to. He's just standing by his locker. All right, cool. So walk into the clubhouse, and there's Delmon standing by his locker, putting his pants on, putting his shoes on.
I was going to ask if he was wearing pants.
He was wearing pants.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes. So I start walking over with notepad and recorder in hand, and he goes, up, like, puts his hand up, and I'm 20 feet away, as if to say, don't come any closer.
Don't take another step.
And I said, and the other two reporters are kind of next to me like, what's going on right now? And I said, I just want to get an injury update. Gardenhire was telling us that your ribs felt pretty good. And he looks up again, and he kind of ignores. And he goes, I'm good. And I'm like, you're good? What? Can you just give me a quick update? And he looks up and he goes, stop talking. Okay. I guess
noted.
I guess we're not one of those just sort of and again, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know him super closely, but just everything going back to him throwing a bat at an umpire when he was 19 or 20 years old to
allegedly throwing a bat
No,
at
there's
an
video
umpire.
of it.
I know. He walks out of the frame, and then the bat comes hurtling back 35 miles an hour.
That could have been anybody, officer.
I don't know who it was.
That could have been a fan. That was the beer vendor. Could have been anybody.
Yep.
Just like it's a sad case of super talented, had a pretty good rookie season, was in the big leagues when he was 20 years old, was a top overall draft pick.
Number one rated prospect for years.
And for whatever reason, whether it was insecurity or just a lack of social awareness or there was just things about his personality that held him back from being a really good player. And I think all those things were pretty obvious even when he had a career year in 2010 for that playoff Twins team. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the biggest, that was a Bill Smith era season too. That was one of the biggest cases of you're never going to give this dude a 5-year contract extension. Sell high on him. He's a corner outfielder, and unfortunately for the Twins, they never did sell high on him.
Yeah.
And they wound up selling low on him just a few months later. So, least surprising story ever. Delmon Young, pantsless, talking to police officers.
2-3 weeks ago, the Twins basically closed the book on that second Delmon Young trade. Lesher Oliveros was the last vestige in the Twins organization from that Tigers trade. They got...
He was never on the 40-man last year, right? You and I did a whole podcast on where is Lester Oliveros.
Yeah, and I criticized the Twins for not calling him up early in the year. He was like, striking guys out in AAA. But then he hit, I think it was Austin Romine. He hit him in the head and drew a suspension at Rochester. And it was like, well, all right, maybe there's not a lot there. And anyways, he was, left off the 40-man this winter, and Kansas City signed him as a free agent reliever. So they were apparently short on 97-mile-an-hour fastballs with not much of a clue of where it's going. But I'm really interested to see if that pans out in Kansas City's bullpen.
Yeah, actually, if there's a team that's going to sign someone who throws 97 miles an hour and might even throw one at someone's temple once in a while, it would be the Royals.
Remember Juan Murillo?
Yeah.
That was one that, after we played that game last week of kind of scrap heap guys, and I know it was a little different situation.
It was a waiver claim, wasn't it?
It was a little different situation, and I had all these names kicking through my head after we got done with that podcast, and people were throwing out names on Twitter, which was awesome. By the way, if anybody heard that episode and has more, Phil Mackey at Derek Wetmore on Twitter. But I had a lot of fun with people just throwing out ideas, and honestly, I'd be sitting there in like an idle moment of thought, and these names would just like start popping into my head, and I'm like, no, get out.
Instead of counting sheep to go to sleep, you're counting Twins bargain bin signings throughout the last 20 years.
What demons have possessed me? I didn't know where my sanity was going at that point. But anyways, that was a fun game. I'm glad we did that.
Did I see correctly that Byung-Ho Park, someone tweeted this out. I think I saw our guy Parker Hageman from Twins Daily tweeted out, he retweeted someone who's down in Fort Myers, that he already sprained his wrist in batting practice last week.
That's what I saw on Twitter, too. In fact, I think it was Parker that retweeted that. Pat's down there, though. I haven't heard anything.
He's sitting out shirtless in the outfield, though, just soaking it all in.
The great thing about Pat is that he'll go down there, way earlier than anybody else. He'll file a dozen stories that are, better than anything I'll file when I'm down there for a month in spring training. And then he can, just kind of kick his feet up the rest of the time.
His whole thing going back, and I just noticed this in the last 5 years since him and I have been working together, 6 years now. But other people have confirmed that this has been his thing with the Twins for a couple decades. He's always keyed in on the 25th roster spot. Mm-hmm. So it's always, like today he took a picture on Twitter at 1500 ESPN _ Royce, if you aren't already following him, of Adam Brett Walker in the batting cage.
Yep.
Which maybe he's a sleeper for a 25th roster spot or something. I don't think so.
I kind of doubt
but
that.
Pat, you'll keep an eye on Pat's columns. They're always throughout spring training.
You know the one that I think he already fired his signal flare. His
Which-
warning signal was at Twins Fest when he caught up with Oswaldo Arcia at the team hotel.
Yep, there it is.
And wrote a column about him.
Yep.
And it's all right, think what you want about Pat. Like, he's not usually wrong on that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was the one to say, I don't think so highly of Kenny Vargas. No, you and I did the same thing. We said, the underlying stats say this guy might struggle. But Pat was the most down on Kenny Vargas out of anybody I know. And he
was also really down on Kevin Love after his first preseason game.
Yeah,
and then 3 years later,
that's
he's going
true.
off for like 25
That's
and 15
true.
and stuff.
Who-
Although those are some hollow numbers now.
But you'd also
back in
ask,
retrospect.
Kevin Love transformed his body and his game. And, I'm not saying that, that makes Pat
So did
right.
Pat, too.
He was, right, true. No, he was wrong about Kevin Love, but, he'll be the first guy to remind you of that, too.
But this is also, in fairness, this is the first time. It's kind of ridiculous, maybe 2 years ago, when they're coming off 3 90-loss seasons or whatever it was a couple years ago, and you're focused on whether the backup utility guy is going to be Eduardo Escobar or they've got major holes on the top end of their roster. But this is actually legitimately a set roster, like you said
More or
early
less,
on,
yeah.
except for maybe 2 or 3 spots. And so the 25th roster spot is really interesting for the first time since probably since 2011, when we all
Sure.
thought going into that season they were going to contend,
It's
and
a
it
competitive
blew up
team.
in their face.
In fact, I remember the Royce Mackey show. I was driving downtown somewhere. This is when I was in college, and I was working on some report. I think I had to go down to the courthouse for a journalism class or something.
Or some other
a booking.
escapade.
Yeah, I was getting booked.
Were you wearing pants?
Yes. They were orange jumpsuit pants, but they were
Sure.
pants nonetheless.
Clearly.
And there was this Royce Mackey episode. Maybe you remember it, maybe you don't. I don't even know if we've talked about this, actually. When you guys were talking about the 2011 season being basically irrelevant.
Okay, I wrote a column about that.
And you guys were talking about it on the radio
Dude,
show,
you know,
I remember.
the title of that column, which I think because we flipped over to a new website now, 1500ESPN.com, I don't know if you can search that column anymore.
I could find it for you if you want me to.
That's okay. Looks like we're on a show. The title of the column was, this is going into the 2000, I wrote this from the airport leaving spring training, going into the 2011 season.
Okay.
I had surveyed 6 weeks of spring training, had covered the entire 2010 season, and my headline going into the regular season was, Mackey, : these next 162 games are a formality for the Twins. And it was all about how they've got to position their roster to beat the Yankees in the postseason. How I didn't get fired on the spot in about June for that column is a miracle.
I've got some advice for you, Phil. Just stop talking.